On December 2nd, 2011, police arrived at the residence of Kylie Copeland in the state of Florida. They observed the victim, 3-month-old Nataley Agee. The child was laying on the floor of the bedroom on her back with dark red marks on her body. They also observed several cockroaches crawling around in the crib where Natalie had been sleeping. Wow, what on earth was going on? See, officers placed crime scene tape around the outside of the residence and started a crime scene log. Police then asked Kylie some questions regarding her infant daughter, Natalie. She said that she was in the living room and then she went and checked in on Natalie at 4 a.m. She then went back to the living room and then went back at 6 a.m. check on the child again. She saw the child was moving around and then laid down on her own bed. Kylie then woke up at 9 a.m. and discovered Natalie laying lifeless on her stomach in the crib. She called 911 and the dispatcher went through the CPR procedure. Kylie told the operator that Natalie had not had any medical problems in the past. She did say that when she saw her daughter in the crib, she stuck her finger in her mouth to try and get whatever she was choking on out. Police asked her, "Well, hold on a minute, why did you think she was choking on something?" Kylie said, "Isn't that what you do when you're trying to rescue someone?" And it was at this point where police analyzed the child's body further. They placed her on the corner of a bed. She had been removed from her crib. Natalie had on a disposable diaper and a yellow onesie with the graphic "Just one of the girls" on the front. Police observed whitish red foam emanating from her nose. Reddish staining was on the comforter underneath and on the infant's head, and apparent hair was present in the mouth. There were insect bites along the back and sides of the left arm, outside of the left hand, along the backs of the upper left and right legs, also along the sides of the left and right legs, and on the tops of the left and right feet. Yes, all those areas, insect bites. What? Police also found trash, garbage, used diapers and other items on the floor. This house was filthy. See, all the images you're looking at are directly from the crime scene. What a disgusting environment for a child. As throughout the residence, police saw cockroaches everywhere. Now, on the day of Natalie's death, Kylie was scheduled to appear in court because she filed battery charges against Trevor Agee, who's Natalie's father. Kylie claimed later that she took a shower, then went to check in on Natalie, who was sleeping, and then found her unconscious in her crib. When the paramedics arrived at the scene, Natalie was pronounced dead. And when they asked Kylie about the marks on the infant's body, she claimed, "Oh, I don't know, I've only just noticed them now." Lying cow. Police then obtained an 11-page report from the Department of Children and Families, and it detailed a history of child neglect by Kylie, who at the time was 21. This death shocked social workers who said Kylie was not known for mistreating her children. Well, she was, they just couldn't prove it. You see, according to a DCF report, the first documented instance of trouble within the family was in 2008. This is before Natalie was born. See, Kylie and Trevor had 3 children. Once they were driving and they were pulled over by a state trooper in Michigan. You see, according to that report, when the police pulled them over, they saw a baby boy sitting sideways in the car and he had duct tape over his mouth. You know why? The parents admitted to putting the duct tape over the mouth to hold the pacifier in place. What? The report included a note written by a Michigan case worker who claimed that the parents seemed willing to improve and compliant through every step of the investigation. They seemed to always be one step ahead of me, which I am honestly not quite used to, the caseworker wrote. Caseworker went on to say, "I am confident they will rise above their young ways and continue becoming mature and loving parents." Oh, how little did you know. The couple then moved to Florida in 2008 to live with Trevor's mother. Social workers again visited Kylie. She had made Polk County headlines in February 2009 when she disappeared without warning after finishing a night of work. None of her relatives who were caring for her son at the time heard from her until a day later when she was found unharmed in Lakeland. She just went missing. What the hell? A similar situation was reported again in September 2009. An investigation by social services uncovered Kylie's struggles with drug abuse, domestic abuse, and diagnosed depression. In August 2010, the Florida Abuse Hotline got a call that Trevor had punched holes in the walls of their home during a fit of anger. The report read that the father has a history of being aggressive to Kylie. In the past, Kylie has sustained marks on her neck and her face as a result of the father assaulting her. Several months later, the Florida hotline received another call about Kylie and her children, this time about their living conditions. The report read, "There are cockroaches and bugs everywhere. They're on the cabinets, the walls, and the children had baby oil in their hair because the mum was overheard stating that the children had lice." When asked about the filthy conditions in her home, Kylie claimed she had no time to clean despite being unemployed. Child Protective Services ordered Kylie to clean the home, which she did. Gee, that's good of you. And then finally, near the end of August, a social worker investigated Kylie twice more when it was reported that she would repeatedly drink to intoxication and would leave her infant daughter at home unsupervised. Additionally, Kylie got into another fight with Trevor, this time in front of their children, which left more bruising, the report states. The police did interview some of the kids. One was limited verbally but stated that the father is in timeout for hurting his mother's face and that he was crying and afraid of the father. Kylie filed for restraining orders against Trevor for herself and the children. However, she dropped the order for her children to allow visitation by the father, Trevor. On the final page of the DCF report, the officials claimed that until the death of Natalie, Kylie had never given caseworkers reason to believe she'd mistreat her children. To them, only the father seems suspect. What? The father is an aggressive abuser. Yes, guy's a muppet. But Kylie, with running away, God knows how long she was gone for, the cockroaches in the house, the lice, how is that not a case of mistreatment? The DCF report said the death of this child is tragic, but based on the fact that there were no red flags as to the mother's propensity for violence, the recommendations from the open report would only have restricted access as to the father. But that's even more insane. That's saying, you know what? We saw evidence, we did a full investigation, and we thought, nah, she's good. What? The conclusion of this report, it said that the mother was educated regarding infant care and handling and had social supports in place. After the death of Natalie, remember she was only 3 months old, but after her death, the 2 surviving children had undergone medical screenings and were placed in protective custody. Now, that's a report on the family's history, but the question remains, what actually happened to Natalie? And according to police, Kylie lied several times. Her first lie was that she claimed she fed her daughter at 4 a.m. I mentioned that previously. She placed the daughter back in the crib, she went back to sleep, and then she went to check on her about 2 hours later, and it was around 9 a.m. that Kylie goes to Natalie and she's not breathing. But of course, this was a complete lie. You see, a post-mortem examination determined that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with child mistreatment. And it does beg the question, okay, something happened to this child physically, but why all the insects and the cockroaches? Was the body there for such a long time that these insects gathered, or were they there in the first place? Wow. The medical examiner also found that Natalie had been dead for at least 8 hours before Kylie called 911. Once confronted with this information, police said Kylie fabricated several more stories trying to explain her daughter's death, until finally saying that the baby landed on her head in the living room after Kylie launched the baby to the floor. She said the child's head struck the couch cushion, causing her to bounce off and onto the floor. This led to the severe brain injury the child suffered. You see, to the police, there wasn't an exact motive that they could work out, but to me it seems clear. She was pissed off. She's got drug addiction, no real income, domestic issues, and children she needs to take care of. It all culminated in her taking it out on poor Natalie. The home being filthy suggests to me insects and cockroaches were around the child anyway, and the moment the child died, in that 8-hour period, they were eating the body. That's disgusting. What do you think Kylie's sentence should be? Trevor was let off the hook, but Kylie, who was holding the child and I guess in a fit of rage, damaged the child's brain. Well, Kylie in 2014 was sentenced to 15 years. And in June of this year, 2024, Kylie was released from prison. Mate, you've heard plenty of true crime stories, and you know when there's cockroaches and insects and rats and all that stuff involved, it is not a story for the light-hearted. But what the fuck is wrong with you, Kylie? Muppet. Now I'm going to tell you the story of Madison Cundiff. You see, she was born on June the 27th, 2002. Her father was David Cundiff. His girlfriend was Sarah Taylor. Sarah being the suspect in this case. They all lived together in Kentucky. By the way, I could not get a single image of Sarah, so forgive me. On May the 6th, 2004, at 10 a.m., 911 dispatchers received a call from Sarah. She told them that Madison, who was 22 months at the time, was unconscious after colliding with a set of stairs. Because of course, we all collide with stairs all the time. Sarah had a 2-year-old daughter of her own. She had been in their bedroom watching a movie while Sarah was in the basement doing laundry. She then heard weird noises on the basement steps and found Madison crying and lying with her head against the wall at the foot of the stairs. Sarah indicated that she had closed the door that led down into the basement, but she did not know whether the door had shut all the way. The door had 3 latches or locks on it, and it could be locked from either side. According to Sarah, Madison cried for a few seconds as Sarah carried her upstairs to the living room sofa before falling unconscious. Madison did not respond to her efforts to get her to wake up. Sarah called her best friend Miranda Miller, who lived close by, to tell her what happened. Miranda immediately told her to call 911, but instead, Sarah decided to call David and told him Madison had fallen and is not waking up. David told her he was on his way and hung up. Approximately 2 minutes later, Sarah called him again and asked him if she should call the paramedics. He told her to call 911, which she did. Emergency responders arrived on the scene soon thereafter and found Madison lying next to a couch. She was unresponsive and was breathing in heavy gasps. They assisted her breathing and gave her other emergency treatments before transporting her to a pediatric intensive care unit at the University of Kentucky Hospital. Dr. Dawn Turner, a pediatric intensive care physician at the hospital, testified that Madison came to the hospital and then physicians immediately intubated her to assist her breathing and performed a CT scan of her head. According to Dr. Turner, Madison was critically ill and appeared to have suffered severe head trauma that had produced brain swelling. That's not something that happens when you collide with the stairs. Efforts were made to reduce the swelling and to otherwise relieve pressure on the brain, the state of which Dr. Turner described as severely abnormal. Madison did not open her eyes or respond to pain at any point, and she experienced multiple seizures and incidents of posturing, in which she held her arms before her in unusual positions. Dr. Turner indicated that there were extensive retinal hemorrhages in both of Madison's eyes. The CT scan revealed bleeding in multiple areas surrounding the brain. Madison also had multiple abrasions all over her body. She was pronounced dead the next day when doctors no longer found signs of brain activity. During her testimony, Dr. Turner explained that injuries of the sort suffered by Madison are commonly seen in high-speed car accidents and in cases where shaking of a child is involved. Further investigation was conducted by the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office, and an autopsy was performed on Madison's body. Dr. Kristen Rolfe, the deputy medical examiner who performed the autopsy, concluded that Madison had died as a result of brain injury caused by blunt force trauma or shaken impact syndrome. In other words, someone did this to her. Dr. Rolfe said that Madison's injuries appeared to have been inflicted and her death should be considered a homicide. Now, on December 14, 2004, the Fayette County grand jury indicted Sarah on 1 count of murder. The indictment alleged that Sarah caused the death of Madison Cundiff by shaking Madison and/or striking her head against an unknown object, thereby causing her death. In 2004, Sarah appeared in court with counsel and entered a plea of not guilty. The case was tried before a Fayette County jury from December 3rd to 11th on 2007. The jury heard testimony from Sarah, who denied taking Madison's life and gave the version of events I've mentioned previously about the child colliding with stairs. I'm now going to report on this trial in two separate stages. First, let me go through what the prosecution presented. In the trial, Dr. Turner and 5 expert witnesses, including Dr. Rolfe and Spivak, offered their opinions as to the cause and manner of Madison's death. Dr. Spivak testified that fatal injuries of the sort found in this case were typically inflicted by someone rather than resulting from an accident. She noted that Madison had multiple marks surrounding her head, including on the inner and outer coils of her ears. According to Dr. Spivak, these latter marks are typically caused by forceful contact of the ear with the surface. Dr. Spivak also noted that Madison's autopsy revealed a bunch of bruises flowing together on the inside of her scalp, and that these could only be caused by extensive force. The doctor also indicated that her examination revealed Madison had suffered thin film subdural hemorrhaging on both sides of her head as a result of significant trauma, an indication that external forces were applied to her head in an evenly and widely distributed manner. Who would do such a thing to a child, eh? She further noted that the type of retinal hemorrhaging in Madison's eyes was severe and unusual, and of a type rarely found in accidents. Dr. Spivak also testified that Madison had suffered trauma to her neck and chest areas, including the larynx, which she said were caused by externally applied forces. Spivak concluded that someone had inflicted Madison's injuries upon her via blunt force trauma by multiple severe impacts, all on the sides of her head, and that they were not caused by a fall down the stairs or any other accident. She testified that the severity of the retinal hemorrhaging found was indicative of a rotational force applied to Madison's head, such as the slamming of a head against a hard or soft surface. Spivak downplayed the possibility that Madison's injuries were caused by mere shaking of the child. So on cross-examination for Sarah, they asked Spivak a number of questions relating to shaken baby syndrome. Spivak indicated that she took a very middle ground on the issue of whether shaking alone could cause these injuries to the child, but she thought that vigorous shaking could cause retinal bleeding in some cases. However, she did not hold this opinion to the same degree of certainty that she did her opinion the head trauma caused this death. When pressed to agree that there was no scientific evidence that shaking causes retinal hemorrhages, Spivak instead stressed this is not a shaking case. This child has marks all over her head, and emphasized that shaking with impact is a very different thing. You also had Dr. Rolfe, who also testified as an expert witness for the Commonwealth. Dr. Rolfe indicated that her job generally required her to perform autopsies in cases involving suspicious death, including trauma cases such as Madison's. Dr. Rolfe noted that her injuries were considered suspicious because they were more extensive than those typically produced by a fall. She was also of the opinion that Madison's death was the result of brain injuries caused by blunt force trauma. Rolfe described Madison's injuries as being a type that would typically result from the head being moved in an arc and then stopped abruptly on a hard or soft surface, while the brain continues to move with the skull. She also indicated that increased cranial pressure can exacerbate retinal hemorrhages. And like Dr. Spivak, Dr. Rolfe believed Madison's injuries were inflicted by someone because of the severity of the impact. She said the injuries were not compatible with a stair fall. When asked on cross-examination if shaking alone could cause subdural hemorrhages and bilateral retinal hemorrhages, Rolfe acknowledged that this had been seen in some cases. For the prosecution, their final expert witness was Gina Bertocci. She said that Madison's constellation of injuries were not compatible with a single stair event, and therefore were not compatible with what Sarah indicated had happened. And according to Dr. Bertocci, the academic literature in this field reflected that fatal or serious injuries were typically not caused by falling down the stairs, and that when multiple serious injuries are claimed to have resulted from a fall, a different cause should be suspected and investigated. She also agreed with Spivak that bruising of the ear is not typically achieved through accidental injury, so the fact that Madison displayed such bruises was significant. Bertocci also testified that the size of the bruises on Madison's head were notable. On cross-examination, Bertocci was asked about a letter from two prominent researchers indicating that the word shaken should not be used in connection with describing abusive head trauma. So that's the prosecution. I'm now going to show you the second stage of the trial, where Sarah herself called two expert witnesses to testify on her behalf. And I won't lie, they stitched her right up. Listen to this. You see, the first was Dr. George Nichols. He was the former chief medical examiner in Kentucky and had extensive experience in forensic pathology. Dr. Nichols testified that Madison's death was caused by blunt force injuries resulting from multiple impacts to her head. Clearly, he missed the assignment. His job was to disprove that. He indicated that Madison's injuries were consistent with a stair fall. However, he conceded on cross-examination that there's nothing that tells me that these injuries could not have been inflicted by someone. Again, he was supposed to prove it was purely a stair fall. He did not believe evidence of shaking existed in this case, because there were no bruises reflecting grab marks on Madison's body. The second expert called by Sarah was Dr. Ronald Osinski, a renowned and board-certified neurologist from Washington, D.C., with extensive experience as an expert witness in this area. He diagnosed Madison's death as being caused by blunt trauma to the head and concluded that her injuries were consistent with a stair fall. He did, however, concede on cross-examination that her injuries could have been inflicted by someone else. Again, you were supposed to disprove that completely, but he believed that the injuries could have been consistent with a fall. He did not believe shaking head had occurred because Madison's body showed no signs of shaking, such as grip marks. So, with all of this evidence, the jury had to make a decision. A child has died, there are no witnesses, there's actually no proof of anyone doing anything, but at the same time, this didn't happen randomly. The jury themselves were instructed on first-degree manslaughter, second-degree manslaughter, and reckless homicide. The instruction on each offense allowed the jury to find Sarah guilty, only if it found that she caused the death of Madison by inflicting blunt force impacts to the head. And in the end, the jury found Sarah guilty of reckless homicide and recommended a sentence of 5 years imprisonment. Now you might be thinking, the child's got so many injuries, 5 years is nothing. But by the letter of the law, there's actually no evidence. None. I couldn't even find a photograph of Sarah. That's how rare this case is. She's obviously no longer in prison. I could not find her anywhere on the Kentucky Department of Corrections. So maybe in this case, 5 years is like, well, we don't know anything else, so that's all we can go by. And today's final story is of Mariah Lucio. This is gonna blow your mind. More insects, more rats. Brace yourself. On September the 21st, 2004, a child protective worker made a home visit to the residence of Mariah Lucio. At this time, the home was found to be unsafe for children. Ants were seen crawling on the floor and mattress where the newborn baby Mariah was sleeping. There was a fan in the window that had no cover, leaving the blades exposed. Inside the refrigerator, there was only a rotten head of lettuce, a carton of eggs, and a plastic container of mayonnaise. The refrigerator had an odor of spoiled food. Ew. The pantry contained one small can of corn, a box of salt, sauce, a small box of infant mixed cereal, and empty condiment containers. There was a strong odor of urine throughout the house. Yes, this house for children smelled like piss. What? You see, today I have the case of Mariah Lucio and the death of her child, Mariah. I'm going to tell you two sides of this story. You have the guilty and the innocent. So let's start with the guilty. You see, on the same day that the child services visited the home, they observed Robert. He was a 4-year-old with a dime-sized bruise on his stomach, an old scratch on his stomach that was about 3 inches long, and insect bites on his arms and legs. He was also observed to have had 2 staples on his head, reportedly from an injury he sustained from falling on the bed. You had Gabrielle, who was 3 years old. He was observed with a bite mark the size of 2 quarters on his left shoulder. You gotta ask, who the hell is biting these children? He had multiple scratches on his face and multiple insect bites on his arms and legs. You had Adriana, who was 2 years old. She was observed with a 1-inch linear scab on the top of her head and multiple insect bites on her back, arms and legs. Her body was very dirty with dried feces on her genital areas. Sarah was a 1-year-old and she was observed to have a 1/2-inch cold sore on the bottom of her lip and multiple, yes, multiple insect bites on her arms, legs and body. How are there so many insects in this house? What the hell is going on? Sarah also had an open circular mark on the right side of her leg that appeared to be infected with pus. She was observed to be wearing neither underwear nor a diaper. Her body was very dirty with dried feces on her areas. Then you had Mariah, who's the victim in this story. She was observed to have tremors every once in a while. And remember, what I'm describing to you is not the crime scene or the time of the murder. This is the house in general. Mariah was also observed to have a small light green bruise on her right foot. No other visible marks were seen. All of the children appeared as if they had not been bathed. Their hair appeared to be matted and dirty. Their bodies appeared to be dirty and all of the children had a strong body odor. Who are these adults living like this? These poor children. And by the way, last I checked, when I had a bruise, it's purple. Since when are they green? So let me tell you now about their mother, Melissa Elizabeth Lucio. She was born in June 1969. She had previously been married and had several other children during this marriage. She actually had 12 children in total at the time of Mariah's death on February the 17th, 2007. 2-year-old Mariah was the youngest of the children. It's not clear whether her husband, Robert Alvarez, was the biological father of Mariah, although Child Protective Services records indicate that he was. In fact, you know what's even more insane? Melissa herself, she gave birth to twins in October 2007 while she was incarcerated for this offense in jail. The story I'm about to tell you, she gave birth while she was in jail, ready to be prosecuted. What? Now, on February 17th, 2007, at 7 p.m., this was a Saturday, paramedics were dispatched to an apartment where Melissa lived with 9 of her children and Robert Alvarez, who was the father of at least 7 of these children. One of the paramedics testified that when the paramedics entered the apartment, they found Mariah unattended and lying on her back in the middle of the floor, not breathing and with no pulse. The paramedics observed that Melissa's distant and not overly distressed behavior was so far out of the ordinary that Melissa told police and paramedics at the scene that Mariah had fallen down the stairs. Mariah was transported to a hospital emergency room where she was pronounced dead. The condition of Mariah's body indicated she had been severely abused. There were bruises in various stages of healing covering her body. There were bite marks on her back. One of her arms had been broken, probably about 2 to 7 weeks before her death. And she was missing portions of her hair where it had been pulled out by the roots. Now, you guys have watched many crime stories, right? How often do you hear people say she's missing portions of her hair? Huh? The emergency room physician testified that this was the absolute worst case of child abuse that he had seen in his 30 years of practice. Certainly wasn't mincing his words. He also testified that his emergency room visual and manual inspection of Mariah indicated no apparent signs of a head injury. The chief forensic pathologist who conducted Mariah's autopsy testified that Mariah's cause of death was blunt force head trauma, which would have occurred within 24 hours prior to her death. And it would have been immediately apparent that Mariah was in distress and in need of medical attention. You see, the pathologist testified that Mariah suffered multiple contusions to her head area, and that blunt force head trauma basically means struck about the head with something like an object, a hand, or maybe she was slapped. The pathologist testified that these injuries would not have been caused by falling down the stairs, and this was the most severe case he'd seen. But this is where the waters get a little muddy. You see, on that night, several investigators questioned Melissa for about 5 hours, beginning at 10 p.m. Melissa initially told the police that Mariah had fallen down the stairs, and for about 3 hours she denied any knowledge of how Mariah became so badly bruised and suggested that her older children could have been responsible. Now, Texas Ranger Escalon, he began to question Melissa about 2.5 hours into the interrogation. Escalon said at the trial that while he observed her investigators questioning her, he could tell from Melissa's demeanor that she was tired, but she was hiding the truth. He testified that Melissa began to open up with him after about 20 minutes of questioning, specifically with him. You see, Melissa's recorded statement reflects that she told Escalon that she only had been striking Mariah since December 2006. Melissa stated that Robert Alvarez never did this to Mariah and that Alvarez was unaware of most of the bruises on Mariah's body. Melissa also stated that none of the other children did this to Mariah and no one except Melissa Mariah. Melissa also stated that Mariah had been in her care for at least the previous 3 days. The jury also saw Melissa on the videotape demonstrate with a doll how she abused Mariah. Melissa also stated that she would strike Mariah when she got mad. Melissa also described how she pinched Mariah's private area and how she would sometimes grab and squeeze Mariah's arm. I know, you're sick and pissed off already, but in a court of law, how damning is this? You see, Melissa described how she bit Mariah twice on the back and different times about 2 weeks before Mariah's death. Melissa said that on one occasion she bit Mariah on the back for no reason while she was combing Mariah's hair. She said in court, "I just did it." Melissa stated that Mariah was sick on the day that she died, but that she was afraid to take Mariah to the doctor because of all the bruises on her. Melissa also stated that Mariah would not eat and that her breathing was heavy. In fact, Mariah slept all day on February 17th, and she would lock her teeth together when Melissa would try to feed her. This was consistent with blunt force head trauma symptoms that the pathologist described. Now, of course, in the trial, the prosecutor will try and portray the criminal in as bad a light as possible. You've all seen it. But it was revealed that Melissa committed several disciplinary violations in the county jail. In fact, in jail, this crackpot, she was fighting and having verbal disagreements with other inmates. She was caught with possession of contraband, unauthorized communication with other people, and being disrespectful to guards. But the defense characterized these incidents as minor. Now, in the trial, the state presented the testimony of a person called Estrada, who was a CPS caseworker. Testifying under a grant of transactional immunity because there was talk about CPS being indicted, Estrada testified that CPS removed Mariah and all of the children from Melissa's care due to physical neglect and negligent supervision just after Mariah was born in 2004. They placed all the children in foster care. Melissa did visit Mariah while she was in foster care, and then in 2006 the CPS returned Mariah and 8 other children back to Melissa's home. But keep in mind, the prosecution claimed, what did the children guarantee them? Why so many children? Why the need to have the children back? It's clear from the evidence so far, she didn't care. Well, they said it was the food stamp money that she converted to drugs and the AFDC checks that she also converted to drugs. That's what the children represented to her, money and drugs. And at this point it was clear because she wasn't feeding them, she wasn't caring for them, and she wasn't taking them to the doctor. In fact, this is what the prosecutor literally said. So why? Why would you want to have 13 children? Is it because the state of Texas gives you money? And because that's evident by the fact that they were evicted under the investigation for failure to pay your rent? That the house was a pig pen, according to some of the reports. Why? Well, if you're getting $24,000 to $2,500 a month and you're working, why do you not have the resources to buy groceries? Oh, it's because you're buying cocaine. Again, that's quite a damning statement, right? Furthermore, Melissa told the police during her recorded statement that she was not close to Mariah because the CPS removed Mariah from her 3 weeks after she was born. No, you muppet. There's a reason why they removed her. The CPS worker Estrada also testified about the various contacts that CPS had had with Melissa before Mariah's death. Estrada testified that the CPS investigated various allegations, usually involving allegations of neglect and neglectful supervision. Now check this out. They had investigations in 95, 96, 98, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, and 2004. What the hell is wrong with this woman or family, including her husband? It was said that Melissa often tested positive for cocaine and that 2 of her newborns tested positive for cocaine during this period of time. That's fucking disgraceful. Okay, there's more to this story, right, where they claim her innocence, and I'm coming on to that, but that in itself is undeniable. The babies were born, right, or they were tested for cocaine inside of them. That is fucking unacceptable. Pardon my French. In the trial, it was revealed since 2004, Melissa had about 17 or 18 positive cocaine tests. Now, in response to all of this, the defense suggested that it should cross-examine Estrada. So the defense said that the CPS should not have returned the children to a parent who tested positive for drugs. Well, duh, don't you think? Estrada also testified that Melissa tested negative in 2 drug tests that were offered between 2006 and 2007. Oh, so she wasn't always crackers, huh? In her recorded statement, Melissa told the police that she had not used drugs since February, but that Alvarez had recently begun using crack cocaine. The police in the house found paraphernalia for smoking crack cocaine in a search of Melissa's apartment after Mariah's death. The pathologist said that Mariah had cocaine in her blood at the time of her death. What? In the trial, other evidence was presented that Melissa received about $5,000 per month in welfare benefits, most of which the state claimed Melissa used to support cocaine. Now, during the closing arguments in the trial, the state emphasized the horrific circumstances of this offense, Melissa's history of violence against Mariah, and her misbehavior in the county jail, in arguing that this isn't going to end with Mariah. This violent behavior is going to continue. Now, this is what the state said about her in court also in the closing argument. Check this out. Have you ever heard anything like this? Check this. They said, this defendant is like a dog that bites a human person. Once that dog bites, there will always be a probability that it will bite again. Same thing with this defendant. Her record speaks to you. This isn't going to end here. This isn't going to end with Mariah. This is going to continue. Wow. Have you ever heard a prosecutor refer to the suspect as a dog, as in subhuman? Wow. So, in 2008, Melissa was sentenced to death. But there was a twist. You see, after long campaigning, the Innocence Project took the case, and this is what they claim. They say Mariah fell down a flight of stairs while the family was moving home. The toddler had a mild physical disability that made her unstable while walking and prone to tripping. 2 days later, she took a nap and didn't wake up. Instead of taking the steps to learn about Mariah's health history and investigating the causes of her injuries, authorities immediately jumped to the conclusion that she had been murdered, and then, through a coercive interrogation, pressured Miss Lucio to make a false statement. Miss Lucio has maintained her innocence on death row for more than 14 years. In fact, during her interrogation, Miss Lucio asserted her innocence more than 100 times, until she was manipulated into falsely taking responsibility for some of Mariah's injuries by police officers. The Innocence Project claimed that the interrogating officers refused to hear the truth, that Melissa did not and would not ever hurt her children. Detectives themselves rushed to the judgment, and just 2 hours after Mariah died, took Miss Lucio in for questioning. And during this interrogation, officers berated her, intimidated her, and Lucio at the time, who of course was pregnant, she was in shock from the loss of her child, and she was interrogated for 5 hours. It's clear the conditions were not ideal. It was said they used coercive methods known to produce false confessions. Research has shown that survivors of sexual abuse and violence, like Miss Lucio, are even more vulnerable to falsely confessing under such conditions. And experts who have reviewed Miss Lucio's case, including her interrogation records, concluded that she was relentlessly pressured and extensively manipulated during the interrogation. After several hours of interrogation, she said, "Yes, I guess I did it, and made other incriminating statements to get the officers to end the interrogation. Her inadvertent statement was then characterized by the prosecution as a confession to murder. Two of the officers who interrogated Lucio were present at Mariah's autopsy, leading to a biased autopsy process. An incomplete investigation into Mariah's health history and causes of her injuries and death. The Innocence Project claimed at Miss Lucio's trial, the medical examiner testified that the bruises and injuries on Mariah's body could only have been caused by abuse. However, pathologists who have reviewed the evidence have concluded that this testimony was false. Mariah's autopsy showed signs of a blood coagulation disorder which causes profuse bruising throughout the body. At the time of her death, Mariah was healing from an injury to her arm, which the medical examiner also said was a sign of abuse. However, a pediatric orthopedic surgeon who reviewed the evidence concluded that the medical examiner's testimony was misleading and that there is nothing about Mariah's fracture that indicates that it was the result of an intentional act or abuse. This was an extremely common type of injury among toddlers that can result from a fall from standing height. The medical examiner also testified at trial that a mark on Mariah's body were bite marks. In fact, bite mark analysis has been wholly discredited since this was presented at this specific trial because it had no scientific basis. Studies have shown that even trained forensic dentists can't agree whether or not an injury is a bite mark. And in 2016, in recognition of the fact that bite mark evidence lacks scientific validity and following the exoneration of a man in Texas convicted based on faulty bite mark evidence, the Texas Forensic Science Commission recommended a statewide moratorium on the use of bite marks evidence in criminal cases. That's actually huge. They're basically saying, okay, bite marks, they're not valid anymore. Now, thousands of pages of CPS records show that Miss Lucio's children never said she was violent with them, and no case workers noted signs of abuse. No physical evidence showed otherwise. This is in direct contradiction on what was claimed during the trial, right? They said that the state presented no physical evidence or witness testimony establishing that Lucio abused Mariah or all of the children. Judge Katerina Haynes wrote on behalf of the 7 dissenting judges from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She said the jury was deprived of key evidence to weigh, and this is crucial. Miss Lucio struggled at times to provide for her family, but she was a caring mother who did her best given her incredibly difficult circumstances. Again, this is according to the Innocence Project. They said Miss Lucio is a survivor of lifelong repeated sexual assault and domestic violence. In fact, she was abused as a child when she was 6. She endured abuse throughout her childhood into her teenage years. She became a child bride at 16. However, Miss Lucio's husband perpetuated the cycle of abuse. Still a minor and unable to leave the abusive marriage, Lucio was trapped and developed a substance use problem. Her husband later abandoned her and their 5 children at that time. After that, Melissa Lucio had 9 more children. This of course included Mariah. Her next partner, who was also abusive, repeatedly sexually assaulted her and threatened to kill her. A psychologist who reviewed recent testing of Melissa said that Melissa has highly abnormal levels of vulnerability to police coercion because of her background. Now, on April 12th, attorneys for Melissa filed a supplemental clemency application including a new declaration from a 5th juror, Melissa's jury foreperson. They joined the call of other jurors on the case to halt Melissa's pending execution or grant her a new trial where new evidence of her innocence can be considered. For example, the jury never learned about the extent of Lucio's history of child sexual abuse and domestic violence and how it shaped her reactions immediately following her daughter's death. The trial court prohibited the testimony but allowed the Texas Ranger who forced her incriminating statement. For the prosecution, her slumped posture, passivity, and failure to make eye contact told them she was guilty. Without that context, the jury was undoubtedly swayed by Miss Lucio's statement and the Texas Ranger's testimony about her demeanor during the interrogation, the context of her child abuse. The omission of this crucial evidence was particularly damaging because the prosecution had a weak case for capital murder and an even weaker case for the death sentence. And at that point, Miss Lucio had no prior record of violence. So lacking solid physical evidence, Cameron County District Attorney Armando Villalobos presented Miss Lucio's conciliatory statement to the jury as a confession to homicide and sought the death penalty. At the time, he actually was seeking re-election and came under fire for failing to thoroughly investigate or prosecute more than 100 previous allegations of child abuse. Ahead of the election, he sought to make an example of Miss Lucio, which helped him appear tough on crime. In fact, today he's serving a 13-year federal prison sentence for bribery and extortion. This dirty motherfucker. Regardless of what she did, that doesn't mean you capitalize and you try and further your own political career, dirty dog. So to conclude on this story, in 2022, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a stay of execution and ordered the 138th Judicial District Court of Cameron County to consider new evidence of Lucio's innocence in the death of her daughter. She's been awarded a new trial. That is a whirlwind of a story. And you know something? There's a case to be made that her child abuse and the way they treated her during the interrogation, yes, definitely affected the case. But I go back to the house, ingesting cocaine, ants, no diapers. That's no way to treat children. So she certainly had to, she had to be convicted for something. Child abuse, child neglect, whatever you want to call it. Death sentence, murder, I don't know. Comment, tell me what you think.